well before the first quarterly review in early next year, 2025, the IMF special delegation is now going to visit Pakistan very next week. To discuss basically to ongoing program developments, the quantitative performance, the structural benchmarks, the key economic indicators, the policy actions in governance, in social, in monetary and energy sectors particularly, state-owned enterprises and investments and so on. Is it the core purpose of the IMF advanced team to visit Pakistan, or they have some other benchmarks as well?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Insofar as your question regarding the IMF's visit soon is concerned, the factors that you have listed are indeed on their roster. As part of any agreement that the IMF comes to with any country, it requires them to fulfill requirements on an ongoing basis, which has a monitoring element. The IMF therefore looks carefully at how a country is doing, and with Pakistan's significant commitments at a cost that has been significant in terms of political capital, but necessary for reforms, the IMF is going to come and discuss with our economic managers how we are doing on those targets. For some of the issues that will be of concern to the IMF, which you have listed, Pakistan has done very well, and so it can proudly say that sacrifices were made, but something positive was realized and is being realized because of those sacrifices. For other things, we may need to recalibrate our targets because what was promised to the IMF was done at a time that was very, very different in the global economy. Our accords with the
Definitely.
IMF date back to last December and January. Now we are in November, 11 months later. The world economy has changed, world politics has changed dramatically. And so, what you're going to have is perhaps a recalibration of targets that are more realistic, given that the nature of the beast has changed entirely in that time.
So, your point well taken. So, Dr. Usman, about the recent 2.5% or 250 basis point policy rate cut by the State Bank of Pakistan to level the interest rate at 15%, it is the fourth cut in a row and a 4 years low right now. So, it is because that the central bank slightly eased its extremely cautious approach, primarily because of the sharp decline in the inflation, the industrial growth, better rice and the sugar crop yield and export surge. What are the other reasons, and how it will be basically encourage the local investors, industry and the small businesses to move Pakistan's economy on?
Your question is extremely important because the metric that you are looking at is one that our business community and our consumers and the government as well is looking at very carefully, which is the base rate, the base interest rate. And you are correct to note that the State Bank of Pakistan has reduced it now by over 800 basis points, but in succession and in a gradualist manner. So now we are at about 15%, but the real effective interest rate is still a positive number because inflation has been low for 3 months in succession, single digit figures. So, what you now have is that, as you correctly put it, an extremely cautious stance. If I were the governor of the state bank, I would have been far more aggressive in reducing rates earlier on to signal that the change is happening because I wouldn't base it just on a wait and see approach, because how long do you want to wait and see while your interest rate is so high and your actual reality on the ground has calmed down so much? If you believe that the economy is getting better, then your interest rate must reflect that so that business activity can truly start. And I believe that the state bank will continue to go in this gradualist manner, which is for the betterment of the economy. And it speaks to your original contention at the beginning of the show of a renaissance or a revival of the economy, which must and can only happen with a reduction in the base interest rate, reflecting
Absolutely,
better
absolutely
price
right, Dr.
levels.
Chohan, absolutely right. Dr. Osman, although China tops basically with the $4 of or 52% of the total foreign direct investment, but we have seen over in this first quarter the diversification in the foreign direct investment as well, because the Hong Kong invested $99 million, the UK invested $72 million, and US invested so far $29 million of investment, with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Azerbaijan combined investment promises of at least $7.8 billion. So, do you think that this diversification will also pay to Pakistan when it comes to the foreign direct investment?
Yes, I believe that diversification of investment sources is critical for any economy because it protects them from any politicization of FDI, and it also gives them a multi stakeholder connectivity, which then adds to further FDI. So, diversification of an investment portfolio, both from the buy side and the sell side, is very important. So, I'm happy to hear that there is some diversification, but for Pakistan, the amount of diversification required needs to be far, far larger
Yeah,
because
definitely. You are
we
absolutely right. Right, Dr. Usman. Pakistan has to launch these euro or the panda bonds, but right now the Fetch and Moody's meagerly improved the long-term rating, also by one notch to triple C plus, and upgrading up to CAA2. So, but finance minister said that we plan euro bonds in the next fiscal year. Uh, when Standard and Poor's, the Fitch and the Moody's will improve Pakistan's overall ratings, and he is optimistic that it will be done in the next year. What do you think the long-term rating will get top gear, considering the slight economic improvements and overall benchmarks which are actually showing the promising results?
Yes, I think that the finance minister has made an expression of good judgment by suggesting that if we float bonds, next year would be the right time. Because right now you're seeing the first stages of an improving local and domestic and international economy. And so right now is probably not the time to float them because you wouldn't get the market interest at a time when global appetite for fixed income is declining for bonds in general as interest rates fall. Once interest rates worldwide come to a steadier state and a lower, steadier state, then the fixed income investors will start to look for where the opportunities lie within this asset class. And emerging markets tend to offer what's called a more high yield investment. And Pakistan's rating will probably improve one notch, possibly two over that time. And that's a good thing because right now, in the recent past, the rating has been, I think, a little bit too excessively downgraded by the rating agencies as part of a panic that they've had, which is not rational in my view. And I think that when the ratings increase and the global interest rates decrease, you will start to see an interest within the asset class for emerging market bonds. Pakistan will be an emerging market category by that time. And if it floats stuff, I think it will be very good so long as some other good things are done on our side. The first thing that would be important is that we stick to our debt servicing obligations on the international debt. Second, the reforms that take place have to incorporate a reduction in the liabilities of the government, which includes the divestiture of things like the SOEs as well as energy sector reforms, and basically showing that there's fiscal soundness to be able to repay the international investors. And the result of this would be that you would have better foreign investment attitudes towards us as an emerging market because they will see that not only does Pakistan have indigenous resources to manage its fiscal problems or fiscal challenges, but also that it is attractive in an international sense. And I think that would be a very positive thing if next year they float it and all of these things are done and the climate overall looks better.
Your point well taken, and Dr. Chohan, you and the finance minister are at the same page right now at this point in time, right? So, Dr. Hidayat, government has approved the Circular Debt Management Plan, CDMP, to reduce the escalation of the pace of the monster of the circular debt under IMF conditions, which is already reached at least 2.4 trillion rupees. and it is said that this move actually will reduce the liabilities in power sector and enhance the financial sustainability. So how do you see this circular debt management plan basically?
Uh, Actually, most of the circular debt in Pakistan, it is coming from the IPPs. So I have not seen anything in practical that how the government will be dealing from the circular debt that has accumulated from the IPPs. I have not seen anything to manage the line losses. I have not seen anything in which the different discos are mismanaging the revenue collection and the debt. So that is, I think, a very tall claim by the government, and we are also having a fiscal responsibility and debt limitation act as old as 2000.
But Dr. Hidayat, government has a plan on independent power producers as well, IPPs. The plan is already there. If Dr. Usman can answer that, how imperative is to, as just Dr. Hidayat mentioned, that the termination of the power purchase agreements, PPAs, with the 5 oldest independent power producers, IPPs, and that which the government claim actually that saves 60 to 70 billion rupees, and the revision of PPAs of 18 other IPPs is actually underway. It will take at least 4 to 6 months, as the Energy Minister has said. The completion of negotiations with the bagasse-based IPPs, withdrawal of the dollar-based indexation and replacing with the Pak rupee, that is again a very important decision which is already taken. So this might help control the circular debt, give space to lower power prices, and facilitate the cheap energy to the industry, which is very important for the competitive exports. How do you see, Dr. Chohan, on that aspect?
I fully agree with you, and I think you've given an excellent summary of it. The important thing is for us as a nation, irrespective of whichever government is in power, to have a comprehensive energy strategy for the next 30 years. That is hard to do because the global energy structure is changing. You have such a fast collapse of solar prices, you have new renewable ideas, you have electric vehicles. There's so many things that are changing, so it's difficult, but you have to have some coherent vision of what you want to do. What I'm seeing right now with the IPPs is a kind of remedying of a bad situation that took 30 years in the making. And this idea of tactically solving things is good, but it is not ideal because you want to have a comprehensive strategy backing this up. And I also think that punitive actions against specific actors actually leaves a bad taste in this sector in terms of future investment. So what you would rather do is, what they're doing is right because you are renegotiating contracts on more favorable terms, particularly what you mentioned in terms of removing dollar indexation. That is quite a ridiculous thing, and that too, payments on capacity rather than on production, etc. All of those factors have to be revised, but if it is done in the context of a longer term strategy of energy, it will be much better for all stakeholders because I do want investment in the energy sector. I do want us to be at the forefront of renewable and sustainable energy, and all of this is possible so long as all stakeholders are brought together.
Definitely. These are, I think so, that these would be the benchmarks which IMF also stressed upon. So, but Dr. Chauhan, one last question, and this question directed to you both. First, if you just answer it, and very brief because we have run short of time, what would be the implications of any eventuality in Middle East, especially in case of any sort of attack on Iran, will have for Pakistan's economy, because this is already very fragile and we are actually getting the low-hanging fruits of the international overall lower commodity prices and the lower oil and the crude oil prices actually. Do you think that the inflation assessment could offset if oil prices and the food inflation jumped, and more taxes will be imposed to plug in the revenue gaps actually? So that will again escalate the inflation, not only the food inflation but also the real-time inflation. So how do you see overall economic benchmarks in case of any regional crisis?
Yes, God forbid something like this happens, it would have catastrophic ramifications for the world economy. And you would see similar echoes to the disruptions you faced in 2022, but at a larger scale, partly because Iran is much closer to us than the Black Sea is, but also because the ramifications in terms of what it affects in terms of oil prices, in terms of the spread of conflict, can be very significant. Pakistan is not a party to this conflict, and Pakistan advocates for peace and for development for all countries working together. And since we have had good recovery signs in Pakistan and in the world overall, I would like this to continue. And the belligerents in the world, whomsoever they may be and howsoever they may be, are in a very strong position to disrupt this, unfortunately. And I would like for a more peaceful environment so that countries can begin to recover from the turmoil of the decade that is already halfway down, the 2020s, and at least have the second half of this decade proceed in a more decent and humane manner.
Absolutely right. You are right.